Good evening, dear students. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. Today is 13th September 2024, and in this session we have some important articles for the discussion, and one by one we'll try to discuss all these important articles. Yesterday you have given one prelims practice question. So the question is, recently formed Middle Eastern Quad consists of which of the following countries? We all knew that there is a Quad grouping in the Indo-Pacific region, and within this Indo-Pacific region, the Quad grouping mainly consists of United States of America, Japan, Australia and India. But recently Western Quad or Middle East Quad was also formed, consisting of countries such as India, Israel, UAE and USA. So the correct answer, so if you just exclude option 4, that is Saudi Arabia, because a Middle Eastern Quad where Saudi Arabia is not part of, apart from Saudi Arabia, India, Israel, USA and UAE are part of this Middle Eastern Quad. So therefore the correct answer for this question is option C. And explanation. So member nations of the Middle Eastern Quad including Israel, USA, UAE and India, and in fact it was formed after the meeting of foreign ministers of India and USA, and in fact it was an attempt to ensure that the relations between Israel and other Middle Eastern countries, particularly the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, would achieve a stability and there will be no violence in the region, right? And today also I have another very important prelims practice question. The question is, the term unicorn company often seen in news means which of the following? So option A is privatization of any loss-making state-owned company, and option B, privately held startup company valued at over US $1 billion and a public sector company merged with another public sector company and foreign multinational company with a monopoly, right? So this is the today's prelims practice question, and this is also very important and easy. So if you regularly follow newspapers and even our analysis, you could easily answer this question, and try to answer this question in the comment section, and correct answer will be providing you in the tomorrow's class. And the first article that we are going to start this discussion is with how direct benefit transfer, which is also called as DBT, empowers women. So the context is that the direct benefit transfer is one of the best way of transferring the welfare scheme benefits to the poorer sections of the society, and in fact the direct benefit transfer would weed out the ghost beneficiaries and would also ensure that the welfare schemes and the benefits of various welfare schemes reaches the genuine poor sections of the society. The context is that direct benefit transfer has done a wonderful job in terms of increasing the financial autonomy and even financial independence of women across India. And in fact in India we already knew that the female labor force participation rate is substantially low, and a significant gender disparities are also existing in India at different regions. And even so, when we talk about these gender disparities, these are highly prevalent in both economic and social spheres, and direct benefit transfer schemes are being examined for their impact on women empowerment and also financial decision making. Now in this context we will look into the potential of direct benefit transfer in empowering women or making women financially independent or self-reliant, and how it could increases the female workforce or female labor force participation in India. So we will be understanding that, right? So in fact, if you look at the data on female labor force participation in India, it is just 28%, and it is very less even compared to the developing countries across the world. And women make up around 95% of those who are not engaged in the education, who are not going to any employment, or who are not going to any training. So therefore you could imagine the nature and the degree of the problem with respect to the unemployment which is highly prevalent in women, and a dropout rate which is prevalent among women, and even women are not taking adequate training, they're not adequately skilled, and because of that reason the labor force participation rate in women is very low. And apart from that, women are not being financially independent and self-reliant. So therefore this has been highlighting the need for an alternative mechanisms to provide a financial autonomy to women. Now how could we provide financial autonomy to women, and how could we ensure that women are financially independent and self-reliant? And that is very important here. And in fact, a research conducted by one of the organization has indicated that income from the direct benefit transfer schemes often spent by women at their own discretion rather than the male members deciding the expenditure or the overall spending of this particular direct benefit transfers by the women. So therefore, since women have been spending this direct benefit transfer scheme benefits on their own, so it has been benefiting the low income households, where a significant portion of income goes to the necessities like food and even fuel as well. And however, the direct benefit transfer funds are shown to circulate back into the economy, and they are also supporting the local consumption as well. And therefore it is very important when we look into the multiplier effect of such direct benefit transfer schemes, because the money which is spent by the women, so which is provided by the government to them through the direct benefit transfer, it circulates back into the local economy. So therefore it supports the local consumption. For instance, the rural households in the lowest income bracket usually spend a large share of their income on the essential items, and when they spend this part of their income or highest part of their income on essential items, that would help stimulates the local economic activity as well. So we need to consider the multiplier effect of such spending or such expenditure of women, so when the government extend DBT benefits to women. And in fact, we should also understand how so this direct benefit transfer would influence the political and electoral aspects as well. So we will try to look into this with the examples of from different states and different direct benefit transfer schemes which are being introduced by different states across country. And in fact, we all knew that there are a number of states which have implemented this direct benefit transfer schemes, and these direct benefit transfer schemes have also targeted women. For instance, Maharashtra's Ladki Bahan scheme and West Bengal's Lakshmir Bandar scheme. So these were the schemes, and in fact these are also direct benefit transfer schemes which were introduced by both Maharashtra and even West Bengal state governments. And these programs overall objective and aim is to enhance the financial independence and make women financially independent, and also take or enhance or increase the decision making power of the women in their respective families. And that is the foundation of a woman empowerment at the grassroots level or at the family level. And it is very important to make women financially independent and also financially self-reliant to take decisions on their own regarding the important choices. And in fact, the direct benefit transfer schemes can actually or usually influences the electoral outcomes, and their effectiveness is a variable. So we could not say that one direct benefit transfer scheme is introduced in one part of India, and the benefits of such direct benefit transfer scheme in different parts of India are not uniform. Rather, they are a variable with a variable impact across different parts of the country. And one example is the previous Andhra Pradesh state government under the YSSCP has also introduced a lot of direct benefit transfer schemes for women in the state, but these direct benefit transfer schemes for the women and the general population did not translate into the large scale electoral success for the YSSCP government. Whereas a similar direct benefit transfer schemes were also introduced by states like Telangana and Karnataka. So So the direct benefit transfer schemes which were introduced in both of these states have positively impacted the political results, and because of that reason, so we cannot say that the influence of these direct benefit transfer schemes on electoral outcomes and effectiveness is not uniform, rather it is variable in nature. And despite such benefits, the implementation of direct benefit transfer scheme is largely inconsistent. So it is variable in nature, it is inconsistent in nature, with some states have been performing better than the other states as well. Additionally, central schemes lack a universal approach, and this universal approach is very important to support the low income women in limiting the overall impact of such schemes or such programs. So we have to understand the implementation and effectiveness of the direct benefit transfer schemes across different parts of India, and what is the approach that is required with respect to the DBT, and how we could actually translate this DBT into a more effective way of empowering and making women financially independent and self-reliant. And state sponsored direct benefit transfer schemes such as Tamil Nadu's and even Punjab's state-sponsored direct benefit transfer schemes have shown a certain degree of improvement with respect to women's financial decision making at the level of family, and even it has influenced the family dynamics as well. However, central government has also introduced certain direct benefit transfer schemes such as Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana are more focused and less comprehensive. So therefore, there is a need for a comprehensive study need to be conducted on these direct benefit transfer schemes and their effectiveness in translating the existing conditions of women and also making women more and more self-reliant, financially more autonomous. So that is very important here. And a nodal ministry, which is a Ministry of Women and Child Development, which usually oversees, administers several direct benefit transfer schemes, and this particular ministry has been struggling with the implementation and ranking low in performance metrics, and this usually affects the reach and the effectiveness of such programs which are introduced by the union government. However, there is a potential for national direct benefit transfer scheme. A national level direct benefit transfer scheme is need of the hour to achieve the objective of making women financially independent and financially self-reliant and make women empowered. So therefore, in this context, there is a usually potential for national level direct benefit transfer scheme to enhance financial support universally for women, and which could addresses some of the gender disparities identified and improve women's position in the society as well, right? So I hope you have understood this particular article. And next article that we are going to discuss about the separation of powers, right? So separation of powers is also very important, particularly for your mains examination and general studies paper 2 Indian polity and constitution section. Separation of power and also checks and balances. You may have heard about both separation of powers and checks and balances in the Indian government. For example, Directive Principles of State Policy, DP SP's Article 50 talks about the separation of executive, separation of judiciary from the executive. So therefore, it is part of the separation of powers, right? So one organ of the government will not interfere and influence the other organ of the government, so which is separation of powers. And apart from that, there's also checks and balances. Remember that Indian constitution has nowhere mentioned the term separation of power, rather Indian constitution has implicitly mentioned about this separation of powers between different organs such as judiciary, executive, and also the legislature. So these are different organs of the government, and Indian constitution has provided for the separation of powers between these three different organs of the government. And apart from separation of powers, so these organs also check the other organs of the government as well, so that these organs would not violate the constitutional provisions, and these organs themselves would not overpowered or dominate the other organs of the government, which is checks and balances. So Indian constitution has provided for both separation of powers as well as checks and balances. The context is that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent visit to Chief Justice of India's residence has set off a new debate on the separation of powers. Prime Minister Narendra Modi belongs to executive wing, and Chief Justice of India belongs to the judicial organ of the government. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently visited Chief Justice residence has set off a debate on the separation of powers, and in fact separation of powers is considered as the cornerstone of the judiciary, and in fact it is also the key feature of the basic structure of the constitution, which the Supreme Court has provided for in Keshwanand Bharati judgment in the year 1973. And separation of powers is considered as the cornerstone of the basic structure doctrine of the Indian constitution, and even post retirement sinecures for judges. And in fact this visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the residence of Chief Justice of India has raised several questions, including a lack of upkeeping of the principle of separating judiciary from the executive, which is enshrined in Article 50 of the Indian Constitution, particularly the directive principles of state policy in Part 4 of the Indian Constitution. Right? So we will understand what exactly is this separation of powers, and then we will also understand the checks and balances as well. So separation of powers is a fundamental principles of any democratic governance, and in fact USA's constitution has provided for a strict separation of powers between the different organs of the government. But on the other hand, Indian constitution has not provided for the strict separation of powers between different organs of the government. And in fact separation of powers is considered as the fundamental principle of any democratic governance, and in fact the separation of powers involves distributing the functions of the government among different branches. So what are those different branches of the government? So we have a legislative wing of the government. So legislative wing is just parliament, and parliament consisting of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and even state legislative bodies, which is the legislative wing of the government. And we also have the executive, and this executive consists of president at the central level, governor at the state level, and at the judicial, so we have Supreme Court, High Court, and all other subordinate courts, right? So these are three different organs of the government, and this distribution aims to prevent the concentration of power in one single branch, and this also ensure that each branch operates independently in a cooperative manner. So this is the overall objective of the separation of powers. Now how Indian constitution applies this principle of separation of powers, so that is what we have to understand. While Indian constitution does not explicitly use the term separation of powers, rather, as I have already told you, that Indian constitution has used the term separation of powers implicitly, and it is in fact implicitly incorporated into the Indian constitution, which allocates distinct functions and powers to the legislature, executive, and judiciary. Now for example, when we talk about the legislature, so legislature enact laws and executive implement those laws, and judiciary adjudicate those laws which are passed by the legislature, right? So each wing or each organ of the government have their own distinct functions, and that is the separation of powers. And when we talk about the functioning of the government by these three different organs, so one organ cannot encroach into the powers of another organ of the government. So that is the essence of separation of powers between these three different organs of the government. And there was one important Supreme Court judgment regarding the separation of powers, so which was Ram Javaya Kapoor versus State of Punjab case. So in this particular case, the Supreme Court has held that the doctrine of separation of powers is not explicitly mentioned anywhere in the constitution, but each branch of the government should not encroach on the powers and the functions of the other organs of the government. And in fact, the Supreme Court in this very same judgment has held that each organ must exercise its powers within the limits which were set by the Indian Constitution. And this structure of separation of powers among these three different organs of the government helps maintain a balanced system of government, and it also prevents any single branch from becoming too powerful. So that is the overall idea behind separation of powers between these three different organs of the government, so that it usually prevents any single branch of the government from becoming so powerful. And we as we have understood that there are three different organs of the government: legislative, executive and judiciary. And when we talk about the legislative branch of the government, so the legislative branch of the government, it is responsible for creating laws, or it enacts laws, right? So adjudication is the function of the Supreme Court, but legislative branch's function is to create laws or enact laws, and even it also oversees the implementation of such legislations. In India, Parliament consists of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and Indian Parliament enact laws within its existing jurisdiction. So existing jurisdiction, now remember that not just Indian Parliament, but the legislative branch usually consists of the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, that is Union Parliament, and also state legislative assemblies, and which make laws in union list subjects, concurrent list subjects, and also the state list subjects. And when we talk about the oversight of this particular three different organs of the government, the legislature checks the executive through mechanisms such as legislative oversight, budgetary control, and even the power to impeach the officials of the executive. So these are the ways through which the legislature checks the executive, right? So this is how legislative oversees or maintains the oversight over the executive. And in fact, the parliament also has the authority to question and even censure the executive. So that's comes under, it is not just separation of powers, but rather it is checks and balances, right? So this is how legislature ensure checks and balances of executive, right? So of executive, right? So when we talk about this executive branch enforces and even administers laws, and executive usually includes president, prime minister, and the council of ministers, right? So we all knew about the executive. So executive consists of council of ministers, and council of ministers collectively responsible to the lower house of the parliament. And in fact, the head of the council of ministers is the prime minister, and in fact prime minister is a link between the council of ministers and also the president, and president is considered as the head of the state, and prime minister is considered as the head of the government. So therefore, the executive branch's responsibility is to enforce and administer laws which are passed by the legislature, and the executive includes president, prime minister, and the council of minister. And in fact, it is also tasked with implementing policies and laws made by the legislature. And if you look at the checks on legislature by the executive, and executive usually influences the legislature's functions through certain certain mechanisms such as president's power to withhold assent or giving assent to the bills, thereby it requires further deliberation. Additionally, the executive can also issue ordinances, right? So article 123 and article 213 so empowers both president and also the governor of the state to governors of the respective states to pass or to issue ordinances in urgent situations subjected to parliamentary approval. And in fact, we also have the judicial branch, and the responsibility of the judicial branch is to adjudicate laws or interpret laws, and also ensure that these laws which were made by the legislature have a conformity with the Indian Constitution. The judiciary would be headed by the Supreme Court, and in fact the judiciary reviews laws and government actions through the lens of judicial review, which the Constitution usually enjoys through Article 13 of the Indian Constitution and also Article 32 with respect to the Supreme Court and High Courts, and in fact Article 32 and Article 13 have provided the power of judicial review to Indian judiciary, particularly Supreme Court and the respective high courts under Article 226 of the Indian Constitution. Now we'll understand what are these checks and balances mechanisms. Checks and balances are fundamental mechanisms within the democratic system that usually prevent any single branch of the government, organ of the government, for gaining too much power. For example, for instance, in recent times, the judiciary has been gaining more power. Judiciary has been even maintaining dominance over both legislative and also the executive as well. So this is rightly called as a judicial overreach, and in fact judicial overreach is considered as the violation of the principle of separation of power, and in fact it is considered as encroachment of the judiciary into the other organs of the government. So therefore in India, these mechanisms are essential for maintaining a balanced governance structure where legislature, executive, judiciary operate independently yet interdependently, right? So that is the overall objective of this checks and balances. Remember, both separation of powers and also checks and balances are very, very important for your general studies paper 2 examination. Remember, if you have any doubts regarding the separation of powers and even the checks and balances, please comment your doubts in the comment section, and we'll try to address those doubts as well. The Indian Constitution's doctrine of checks and balances was introduced by the Supreme Court in 1993 decision in Kannadasan versus Tamil Nadu state. So this is where the doctrine of checks and balances was introduced by the Supreme Court, right? So in fact Indian Constitution has nowhere mentioned this doctrine of checks and balances in the Indian Constitution. Rather, it is implicitly provided by the constitutional framers into the Indian Constitution to ensure that one organ of the government or one branch of the government never shadows the other branches of the government. And next very important article is Mission Mausam, and in fact it is one of the cabinet decisions that was recently taken. So we will understand what exactly is this Mission Mausam and what are the objectives and why it is launched, right? So this is given in the Indian Express newspaper, and in fact this Mission Mausam is very important from the prelims point of view. So a newly launched Mission Mausam will not just help in improving the weather forecast in the country, but also enables the meteorological department to develop capacities and capabilities which will help to manage certain weather events, such as enhancing or suppressing rainfall over one particular area. For example, cloud seeding is a method, and this cloud seeding method is used to create a rainfall over area where there are no conditions which supports the rainfall according to the requirements. So this particular capabilities of the meteorological department will be used to either enhance or suppress rainfall over an area according to the requirements and as per the top government official. So this is the objective of Mission Mausam, and we'll understand what is this Mission Mausam. So Mission Mausam is a 2000 crore initiative, so that was approved by the Union Cabinet. So in fact it was one of the Union Cabinet decisions that were taken 2 days back, right? So we have also discussed about the electric mobility decision taken by the Union Cabinet recently. We have discussed that yesterday, right? Overall, this Mission Mausam is 2000 crore initiative, and this was approved by the Union Cabinet, and this Mission Mausam aims to enhance India's weather and climate forecasting capabilities by the year 2026. And in fact, Mission Mausam was spearheaded by the Ministry of Earth Sciences, and in fact the mission also seeks to make India weather ready, and also it is climate smart in nature and improving resilience against climate change and even extreme weather events. So this is the overall objective of launching Mission Mausam, right? So Mission Mausam, which was approved by the Union Cabinet on Wednesday, aimed at improving India's weather forecasting capabilities, right? So we need to forecast weather. Now weather forecast is very important. It will help us in disaster preparedness, and weather forecasting will help us in planning agricultural activities accordingly, thereby significantly reducing the losses in the agriculture sector, and planning the sowing of Kharif and Rabi crops, and also harvesting of crops, and minimizing losses which are associated with such weather-based disasters. So altogether weather forecasting is very important, and this Mission Mausam is aimed at weather forecasting and further enhancing or improving the weather forecasting capabilities by upgrading the weather monitoring infrastructure, investing in scientific research, and even improving the skills of the scientists as well. However, Mission Mausam has been allocated a 2000 crore for the next 2 years, and in fact this particular Mission Mausam would be implemented over a 5-year period, with the budget for the second half to be decided at the later stage. And an important task under this Mission Mausam would be intensifying the weather observation network in the country, and in fact it is intensifying the weather observation, weather monitoring, weather forecasting network, not just over land but also over sea and even over the sky as well, right? So this is one of the objective of launching a Mission Mausam, and this would directly help improve weather model with more accuracy, and it can also facilitate studies which could pave way for better understanding of the climate sciences. So over the next 18 months, the numbers of Doppler radars, wind profilers, radio meters, and even radio stations will be increased in many folds as well. And in fact all these are essential important tools and infrastructure that will be used for recording weather data from across the surface, atmosphere and oceans as well, right? So this is the objective of Mission Mausam, and that will improve the capabilities of weather forecasting, and weather forecasting has a lot of applications, and it will help different areas and further enhancing or revamping the existing disaster planning, evacuation of people, and planning agricultural activities and wide variety of areas, right? So next important article is with respect to the water security, and how water security is very important for rural areas, and how water security is linked with the women empowerment and job creation and improving the livelihoods of the people in rural areas. So this is also a very important article, and we will try to discuss this in a very detailed manner as well, right? So in fact, in India, more than half of the country's population, they are directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture. We all knew about that. So around 49 to 55% of India's population they have been directly or indirectly dependent on the agriculture sector, and therefore the prosperity and economic growth in rural sector becomes vital and very important. However, so the average land holding in India is also very low, and agriculture sector is dominated by the small landholder farmers, or we could also say that small and marginal farmers. So in India, nearly 90% of the farmers are small landholders, so means they hold a very small amounts of land, less than 1 hectare, and therefore there is a need for work for large land holding farmers may not be effective for them. And even in fact, if we come up with measures and those measures focuses on large land holding farmers, so these measures will not significantly benefit the 90% of the small and marginal farmers in India. And in this context, it is very important that the urgent policy refinements are needed, and these policy refinements would further ensure people's economic independence and also a prosperous rural India as well. And these must include climate resilience, water conservation, and even sustainable practices to navigate an important transformation in the rural areas, right? So in this context, in order to ensure or in order to achieve the rural transformation, a significant first step is to recognize that much of the agriculture depends on the women in India, right? So this is where the much of the agriculture sector essentially depends upon, with employable young men migrating to urban areas. And land tilling and allied businesses in the rural sector are increasingly being shouldered by the women as well. So in agriculture sector in India, particularly in rural areas, generally what happening is that the male members of the rural areas, they generally migrate out of the rural areas in search of better working conditions or employment opportunities. So therefore, in rural areas, a large number of workforce who are engaged in the agriculture sector are women, and that's why so we could say that the phenomenon that we see in Indian agriculture is feminization of Indian agriculture. So since in this context, feminization of Indian agriculture, so specifically we need to look into the empowerment of women. However, in order to empower women or achieve empowerment of women, so we need to make agriculture more and more profitable, because a majority of women who are engaged in the agriculture sector in rural areas, and empowerment of women, financial independence of women, financial autonomy, and enhancing the decision making power of women usually depends on making agriculture profitable, right? So in fact, agriculture sector also has a lot of potential to ensure or achieve the goal of empowering women. So therefore, the full potential and economic autonomy of women farmers could be unlocked, so if we take measures to ease their currently restricted access to knowledge, finance, and even markets as well. And in fact, so if you look at India's agriculture sector, so India's agriculture sector is mainly rain fed in nature, right? So when I say Indian agriculture is mainly rain fed in nature, that essentially means that we do not have a significantly improved irrigation infrastructure or irrigation facilities. So therefore, if you look at the Indian agriculture, so Indian agriculture is primarily based on both southwest monsoon and also the northeast monsoon, and because of that reason, Indian agriculture is mainly rain fed, with all the vagaries of Indian monsoon are still existing. And in fact, the vagaries of monsoon have been becoming more and more intense in recent times because of the climate change as well. So therefore, this makes it susceptible to water scarcity. This particular dependence on monsoon rainfall makes Indian agriculture predominantly dependent on water or rainfall, and that makes Indian agriculture water scarce, and also unpredictable precipitation patterns is also the cause of concern in the Indian agriculture. So therefore, in this context, what we should do, so we need to incorporate water conservation strategies, and these water conservation strategies including collecting rainwater and using effective irrigation technologies such as drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, and even managing watersheds. So this is very, very important, particularly to further enhance the existing irrigation infrastructure in Indian agriculture, so that Indian agriculture will not be predominantly dependent on the rainfall. So therefore, it is crucial and it is very important to preserve soil moisture and even sustain the long-term agricultural output as well. So underlying all these is the need of recharging the groundwater. So groundwater is one of the sustainable source of drinking water, and in fact in India, so more than 85% of the underground water is used for the agricultural purposes. So therefore, underlying all this is the need for recharging the groundwater. In India, the groundwater tables are also falling at a significantly faster pace, and in this context it is very important that we need to improve the underground water tables. In fact sorry so in fact, recharging groundwater would be a slow process, but without which we will run the risk of over consuming the water as well. So these water efficiency linked measures will help further substantially enhance the crop yields, ensuring that crops receive sufficient moisture throughout their growth cycles. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently unveiled 109 high yielding climate resilient biofortified crops, and in fact the author considers this as one of the commendable step in ensuring the climate resilient agriculture or regenerative or sustainable agriculture, which could withstand the negative impact of the climate change. And weather forecasting and real-time data, so it can usually assist farmers make well-informed plantation and harvest choices, and it will also help them minimize losses caused by the unpredictable factors. So however, India has a large young population too, and well set to reap the demographic dividend in India. So the spread of tech-enabled activities in these villages can usually keep youth engaged throughout the year in the agriculture sector, because agriculture sector doesn't usually means only managing crops. Rather, we have several other allied activities also, such as sericulture, dairy farming, poultry, apiculture, sericulture. So all these things can be practiced by the women, and particularly women, and these all allied activities would provide a lot of opportunities for women and youth in these rural areas. So much thought at the highest level is needed to make rural India a powerhouse of agriculture sector, and rural India also has a lot of potential to ensure food security for India. And in this context, a comprehensive and a holistic approach, and this particular approach should factors in active inclusion of women in the economic cycle, and it also makes exciting for the youth to stay in their villages, and also fosters startup thinking would be a very, very important and crucial in rural areas, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. See, if you have any doubts regarding this particular lecture, so you can comment those doubts in the below comment box, and we'll try to answer these questions as well. And thank you so much. Please like the video and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.